Have you ever noticed the people who can see exactly what is wrong with everyone around them, but have no idea the same thing is happening in them? They know why their colleague keeps failing, understand their friend's self-destructive pattern better than that friend ever will. They have precise insight into why their partner reacts the way they do, and why people in general are so blind to their own flaws. Meanwhile, they never diagnose themselves this way. This is not a character flaw. It is not arrogance, although it can look like it. It is built into the architecture of the human mind. Researchers at Stanford confirmed it in 2002 and have been replicating the finding ever since. Psychologists Emily Pronin, Daniel Lin, and Lee Ross gave it a name: the bias blind spot. Here is what it says. Every person is far better at detecting bias in others than in themselves. Not slightly better, dramatically better. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Knowing about bias does not fix it. In Pronin's studies, people who were explicitly taught about cognitive bias still rated themselves as less susceptible to it than others. The knowledge went in. The blind spot stayed exactly where it was. George Gurdjieff probably saw this coming. He named it a century before the research caught up, and what he said about it is darker, more precise, and more useful than anything the psychology papers contain. That is what this episode is about. To understand why Gurdjieff's version cuts deeper, we need to start with what the science actually found, and why the solution everyone assumes will work has never worked. In 2002, 3 psychologists at Stanford University ran a deceptively simple study. They asked people to rate themselves on a list of well-known cognitive biases. Things like the halo effect, self-serving attribution, and the better-than-average bias. Then they asked those same people to rate their peers on the same list. The results were consistent across every group they tested: airport travelers, Stanford students, seminar participants. Every single group rated themselves as less biased than the average person around them. Not a little less, significantly less. Think about the mathematics of that for a moment. Everyone in the room believes they are less biased than the average person in the room. That is statistically impossible, but it is what people consistently believe. Then Pronin and her colleague Matthew Kugler pushed it further in 2007. They ran a follow-up study that exposed the mechanism driving all of this. They called it the introspection illusion. Here is what they found. When people judge others for bias, they look at behavior. They watch what the person does, notice patterns, and draw conclusions from the outside. But when people judge themselves for bias, they do something completely different. They look inward. They search their own thoughts and intentions. And because their intentions feel good to them, because they can feel that they meant well, they conclude they are not biased. The problem is that bias does not live in intentions. It lives in the gap between what we think we are doing and what we are actually doing. Intentions are the last place you would find it, and yet that is exactly where we look when we examine ourselves. Pronin and Kugler confirmed this with a striking test. They gave participants access to other people's introspective reports, their private thoughts and intentions, not just their behavior. Even with that access, the bias blind spot remained. People still judged others as more biased than themselves. The illusion was not about having less information. It was about trusting the wrong kind of information when it came to themselves. This is where most psychology articles stop. They describe the problem, maybe suggest awareness training, and move on. But Gurdjieff had something to say about why awareness training seldom works. Gurdjieff did not call this psychological condition the bias blind spot. He called it identification. But he was describing the same territory, and he mapped it to a depth that modern psychology has not yet reached. Identification, in his system, is what happens when a person becomes so merged with their current state, opinion, and self-image, they lose all ability to observe it from the outside. The angry person does not see their anger as a state they are in. They experience it as reality. The world really is unfair. The other person really did cause this. Then, anger is no longer a feeling. It becomes a fact. A person who is identified with their own objectivity cannot see their own bias. Not because they lack intelligence or they have not heard of cognitive bias, but because the very state of believing that you are objective is itself the identification. It feels like clarity from the inside. It looks like blindness from the outside. This is why knowledge alone fails. Cronin's research showed that telling people about bias changes almost nothing. Gurdjieff would not have been surprised. He would have said that reading about the bias blind spot from inside is like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The instrument you are using to look is the very thing you cannot see. He made a more uncomfortable claim on top of this. He said that most of what people call self-knowledge is not self-knowledge at all. It is a story, a narrative constructed after the fact to explain behavior that was driven by forces the person never observed. You act, then you explain why you acted. The explanation always makes you the reasonable one, the well-intentioned one, the one who was responding to what the other person did. Cronin's research confirmed this in laboratory conditions. Participants consistently described their own biased judgments as accurate and objective, even after being shown evidence that they were not. The story was more powerful than the evidence, and the story always cast them as the clear-eyed observer in a room full of people who were not. Gurdjieff went one step further. He said, "There is a reason this mechanism is so stable, so immune to ordinary correction, and that reason is the most unsettling part of this entire inquiry." Here is the claim. The bias blind spot is not a bug in the system. It is a feature that works exactly as nature designed in humans. Gurdjieff argued that the human machine is built to maintain itself, and the most efficient way to maintain a machine is to prevent it from questioning its own operations. A system that could see all its own errors with clarity would be forced to change constantly. It would be unstable, unreliable, and costly to run. So the machine generates something that prevents this. A filter, a buffer between what the person actually does and what they believe they do. That buffer is what makes ordinary life possible. It allows a person to function, to maintain consistent self-image, and to move through the world without being paralyzed by the full weight of their own contradictions. The problem is that it also makes real self-knowledge nearly impossible, because the same mechanism that stabilizes the machine is the mechanism that hides it from itself. Consider what this means for the bias blind spot. The introspection illusion is not a flaw in our thinking. It is a protective mechanism. When you look inward and find only good intentions, you are not being naive or self-deceived in some correctable way. You are running the program the machine was built to run. The machine is doing its job perfectly. Its job is to keep you confident, consistent, and moving forward without examining too closely what is actually driving you. This is why education about bias has such a weak effect. The machine absorbs the information and files it under other people. It does not apply it to itself. It cannot. Applying it to yourself would require stepping outside the machine to look at it. But the machine has no outside, or almost no outside. Because Gurdjieff believed there was one thing that could interrupt the machine's self-protection. Not knowledge, good intentions, or sincerity. Something rarer and more demanding than all three. Gurdjieff called it self-observation. He was very precise about what he meant, because most of what people call self-observation is not self-observation. It is self-commentary. Self-commentary is what happens when you think about yourself. You narrate your behavior, explain your reactions, and analyze your patterns. You do all of this from inside the same system that generates the bias, using the same faculties that produced the blind spot in the first place. It feels like self-knowledge, but it produces more stories. What Gurdjieff was pointing at is something structurally different. It requires splitting attention. Part of your attention goes to whatever you are doing, feeling, or thinking in the moment. The other part watches that happening, without comment, without explanation, and without immediately converting what it sees into a narrative that makes you the reasonable one. That second part, or the watching part, is what he called the observing eye, and it cannot be faked. The moment it starts explaining, justifying or narrating, it has collapsed back into the machine. It has become self-commentary again. Here is why this is so difficult. The observing I has to see the bias in real time, not in retrospect. Retrospect is always edited. By the time you are thinking about what you just did, the machine has already been through the footage and made its adjustments. The explanation you have feels accurate because the machine built it to feel that way. Real observation happens in the moment of the reaction. You feel the pull of a bias as it moves through you. You notice the interpretation your mind immediately provides. You see the conclusion arrive before you have examined the evidence. And you hold that seeing without letting the machine immediately process it into something more comfortable. Cronin's 2007 research pointed to this without quite naming it. Her participants could not see their own bias through introspection because introspection is a machine function. It is retrospective. It works on memories and feelings and intentions. The bias had already happened and been filed before the introspection began. What would have been needed was something that caught the bias while it was still forming. Something operating at a different speed and from a different position than ordinary thought. Here is what genuine self-observation eventually shows you if you practice it long enough and honestly enough. You'll notice that you are not more objective than the people around you. You are biased in the same directions they are, sometimes in opposite directions, always in ways that serve the machine's need to maintain its own image. The clarity you feel when you look inward is not clarity. It is the sensation of the filter working as designed. That is not a comfortable thing to hold. Gurdjieff did not expect it to be. He said that the first real result of genuine self-observation is a kind of remorse, not guilt, but something cleaner. It is the recognition that you have been operating with less awareness than you believed. This is not a reason to despair. It is the beginning of something useful, because the person who has seen the machine from the outside, even once, even briefly, has a reference point the psychology articles cannot give them. They know what the observing I feels like when it is actually working. They know the difference between self-commentary and self-observation. The bias blind spot does not disappear. It will be there tomorrow the same way it was there yesterday. But the person who has actually observed it with complete awareness is no longer run by the bias.